Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics, brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the co-creator of the HBO Max series, Harley Quinn. It's Patrick Schumacker. Thanks for coming on, Patrick.
Hey, David. Thanks for having me.
So we're going to jump into a whole lot of Harley Quinn, because I'm sure everyone's expecting that. But I want to start with your background with comics, because it's clear that there's going to be one, because you have an X-Men tattoo? What is it? I'm curious. You got it when you're 18, right?
I did. I grew up in St. Louis. I loved comics. Born in 1980, and so when I turned, I think 11 was around the time that Jim Lee and Chris Claremont were kind of rebooting X-Men, right? X-Men #1 sold 8 million copies or whatever, still the best-selling comic of all time. That had a huge influence on me, and it was right at the perfect sort of time in my youth. So when I went to college in Austin, University of Texas, there is a street in Austin called 6th Street that is pretty infamous. It's sort of like maybe a mini version of Bourbon Street, tons of bars, and with it, tattoo parlors that people can drunkenly get tattoos and make poor life decisions at into the wee hours of the morning. And so, I was 18. My then girlfriend, who was visiting me at the time, was like, "I want to get a tattoo." I'm like, "Okay." She's like, "But I'm not going to get one unless you get one." And then I immediately went to, "I will do anything for you." Okay. What do I like? Which is a great thing to ask right before getting a tattoo. And so sure enough, I ended up with, on my left, I guess it would be deltoid area, the classic circle with the X in it.
Nice.
The red and black one. And it is now kind of it's faded because that was about 22 years ago. But it is I think fairly discreet. I have had a couple of people in the few occasions that I've had my shirt off and what is that? Looking at me like it might be some sort of, I don't know, white nationalist thing. And I have to remind them of what it is.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so that's my only tattoo. I used to tell people that it's Wolverine tearing out of my butt cheeks. But yes, this is far more tasteful than that.
I have one tattoo as well. It was because my friend and I, we used to do these scavenger hunts with our groups of friends, and she was moving, so we decided to come up with this really weird, elaborate one that only we could do with the just insane point numbers. And one of the things that were on our list, or was on our list, was get a tattoo for free. And So I got a tattoo for free that's just a dot on my wrist, and it is expanded and contracted over the years, and every time I look down at it, it makes me laugh a little bit. As far as tattoos go, I mean, it's pretty much right where my Fitbit band goes. So it's it's pretty much always covered. But anyways, well, long story short, you have obviously loved comics for a long time, because when facing the gauntlet of what tattoo should I get when I'm on 6th Street when I'm 18, you got an X-Men tattoo. But I'm curious, before that, when did your love of comics start, and what made you love everything about the medium?
Oh, well, it probably was influenced by television.
Yeah.
Because I think kind of concurrently with my love of books was the X-Men cartoon, of course, which is such an influential thing. Of course, Batman, the animated series, those being kind of early 90s, kind of around that sweet spot. I guess Jim Lee's X-Men predated that a little bit. But I would say that television really accelerated that love of comics. And I grew up in suburban St. Louis. At the time, we were, I would say, blessed with several really great shops. And it was a thing, that weekly trip to the comic shop was like a ritual that I had with my grandfather. Mm-hmm. And he was somebody who, he wasn't a big consumer of media. But, he's born in the 20s, he was very familiar with, the big guns, Superman, Batman and whatnot. And he totally indulged me in every hobby that I picked up. And this was just one of those things that we would do on a weekly basis. And it was a really special thing for me. So we used to go to this shop in Kirkwood, Missouri, called the Fantasy Shop, which I don't think is around anymore. It's been a while, but that was kind of like, I think at the time, sort of like the flagship shop in St. Louis. And yeah, I didn't have like other than X-Men, I don't think that I had like a particular allegiance to certain characters. Again, like the death of Superman
Oh yeah.
was such an event. I feel like it was an Image, of course, was just a kind of this burgeoning like upstart shortly thereafter. I mean, everybody listening to this knows their comic book history, but that was like around
92.
the time that I read. Yeah. So I just was inundated with, with comic books and that culture and the speculative market blowing up and all of that. And like we actually had like legit conventions in St. Louis that were, comics specific or comics and cards, that sort of thing. I mean, I had all those like X-Men cards. And,
Oh yeah.
what was it? Marvel Masterpieces, the painted cards, it was all around that same time. I remember very vividly meeting John Romita Jr. and him signing my Ghost Rider, Punisher, Wolverine, Spirits of Vengeance comic.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I just think that it was. This is probably a cliche story, but like, or reason for getting into it, but it is pretty unlimited, right? When you think about like, sequential storytelling, be it television or film or comics, like, comic books kind of allow you to do anything. The limitations are only in the writers and the artist's imagination, and then the page count, right?
Yeah.
And even working in animation now, like it seemed initially, I was incorrect to think this. It seemed initially that it was kind of similarly unconstrained, right? Because it's people drawing things, right? You don't have to build sets, and that was an incorrect way into it, which we can get into later. But I love. I think I love the soapy aspect of the continuity as well, and getting into just these decades of character history that all kind of fits together. Sometimes not, but we have short memories. So I don't know. I think it was that kind of the shackles were off as far as storytelling goes.
Well, it's kind of actually a perfect time to grow up. I mean, honestly, as a comic fan, because I grew up during that time, roughly speaking, as well. And people look back on the 90s as this really, dark time now. But during it, if you were a kid, it was like unbelievably exciting. Like everything was ridiculous, but like perfectly kid ridiculous. And everything was like hyped. And as a kid, you were like, of course I'm going to buy into this hype. If 8.1 million copies of this comic was sold, of course I'm going to buy X-Men #1. This is going to be amazing. And Death of Superman and et cetera, et cetera. I think it's funny because I have rose-colored glasses about that period, but at the same time, I feel like is a really fun time. But I am interested in how much, it's kind of funny. It's like you grew up on the animated series, you love the comics. It kind of feels like you were almost like predestined to make this series. and I'm curious as to how much those early loves affected your own interest in storytelling.
Oh yeah, I mean, absolutely. I ended up kind of taking a fairly circuitous path. I mean, I think this is common for people who are in a position that I'm in now. Getting to run a show, getting to create a show. There are no sort of two exactly similar stories, and everyone has kind of a circuitous path. But I moved out to LA pretty much immediately upon graduating in 2002 from UT, and my aspiration at the time was to direct TV commercials,
right,
and music videos. That's really what I wanted to do, and that part of that was both my parents worked for Budweiser, Anheuser-Busch, growing up in marketing. I was like so privy to like. That was another thing where it's like, okay, X-Men was in its heyday, but then on the other side was like it was the Budweiser Frogs and like and the ladies' night Bud Light guys, and there were these like giant like Super Bowl campaigns that like my parents were working on, and I was privy to that. Like I remember my 16th birthday my dad was like, "Do you want to come with me to LA to go hang out on set of a Bud Light commercial?" And I was like, "With Don Rickles." And I was a
Nice.
giant comedy nerd too, so I loved comics and comedy. Like to this day, like Wayne's World and Pee-wee's Big Adventure are kind of my two favorite live action films. And anyways, all of this led to I love film, I love storytelling, I love and I know commercials.
Right.
So I was like, I'm going to go to film school. I'm going to come out. I'm going to just be a commercial and music video director. And then sure enough, like I got a job as a director's assistant. I lucked out and got a job as a director's assistant and worked in that for a while. And that was, the specific commercials that I was working on were like not my cup of tea. It was more like sports and outdoors stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I really wanted to do comedy. But like the genre aspects didn't really kind of seep in until like late in the game, probably until Powerless, which was that was like 2016. So that was like 14 years after I moved out. I always just thought I met Justin, my current writing partner I actually met him in 2001. We interned together the summer between my junior and senior year of college. And we lived in Westwood which is where UCLA is. And they had like 10 movie theaters in Westwood at the time. Now they're down to like 2. But he and I would just go see a movie like every night. And the first one that we saw together was Pootie Tang, which we bonded over our mutual love of. And I always thought like I would get into comedy, right? That was first and foremost. And I never even dreamed of sort of like being able to mash up the genre aspects with comedy until I got into a position where we'd been working in television for 6-7 years when Powerless came about,
Right.
Which really like not unlike Harley ended up kind of weirdly like landing in our laps. So without getting into all the nitty gritty details of like how we broke into television and all that, we it's a lot of luck. We had a show on CBS in 2010 called Bleep My Dad Says was the official name. That was based on Justin's life. Which is his Twitter feed. It was based on his relationship with his father. Starred William Shatner. Did about 18 episodes of that on CBS. And it was, a big launch, but then it fizzled out fairly quickly. But then we got lucky. We got staffed on several shows. A few years after that, we're on a deal under contract at Warner Brothers Television to create and develop and staff on their shows. And at the time, there was a show Powerless, which we did not create. It was Ben Queen created it, who created the show A to Z, and he's also the screenwriter of Cars 2 and I believe 3 as well. And anyways, he had created the show set in the DC universe, and it was a workplace comedy. And at the time, he asked us if we wanted to consult on it, and we said okay. And it was a thing where we weren't sure because we actually had Harley in development at that time, which was again 2016, so 4 years ago. So this tells you how long animation takes to actually finish. But we're concurrently like pitching Harley to the studios while consulting on this show Powerless, but 5 days a week. It was like a full-time job, but our title was consulting producers. And then about like 20 weeks into pre-production, which is a long time, the network, NBC, decided that they wanted to move in a very different direction. And so we were asked very forcefully by the studio to run the show.
Right.
And so that was a whole thing, which I don't look back on very fondly just because of feelings.
I do.
But
I do think it's really interesting how you two you got together. Something seemed to jive, and then you worked on a number of comic related shows. You had Powerless. You co-wrote an episode of iZombie, a good one, a very good one actually. And now you're doing Harley Quinn, and I just think it's fascinating that. I mean, that's one of those things where the question becomes, was that something that you two pursued because of a mutual fandom, or was it largely just how it worked out?
It was largely just how it worked out. So the iZombie thing was that Rob Thomas, who co-created iZombie, or he developed by, right, adapted for television.
Right.
He was friends with Justin because Justin had gone on a book tour for, I think, his second book, and came to Austin to book people, big bookstore in Austin. And Rob came, and just because he was like, I love the book, I want to say hi. Also, you work in television, I work in television. And then this was, I guess it was like around 2015. He called us up and was like, hey, do you guys want to consult like 2 or 3 days a week on iZombie? And we were like, well, yeah, we're currently just developing stuff, and it feels like we should probably be doing a little bit more for the studio. And so, yeah, that seems great. And also, we like this show, and it would be nice to work on a show that we like. So so we jumped onto that, and we were only on it for probably 3/4 of the season because we ended up getting a pilot. We did a pilot with Rob. Wait, no, now I'm mixing up dates. We had a pilot in development that took us away from iZombie. But yeah, we did get to write one episode that unfortunately I could not go up to Vancouver to be on set for, but I had a good reason because my child was being born. So always a good reason not to go to work. And so yeah, we really learned a lot on iZombie in terms of serialized storytelling, which came in super handy with Harley.
Oh yeah.
Because prior to that, we were doing a ton of like broadcast episodic television that really doesn't, there's through lines but not so much, right? It's not so important. I mean, now you have The Good Place, and you're starting to see it more. Just, I think, the advent of serialized streaming shows that were, very bingeable has ended up kind of insinuating itself into broadcast storytelling. But nonetheless, iZombie taught us so much about breaking out sort of, that big idea story for an entire season. That's sort of, you can look at it like a film in 3 acts or whatever, right? Like it's like, or in the case of Harley, it's like it essentially works out to being like a 6-hour movie sort of. So super valuable tools that we learned from Rob, and then every single one of these things fell in our lap.
Yeah,
we have a good relationship with a lot of people, and especially executives at the studio. And with Harley, it was Susan Rovner, who now is the head of programming. I'm going to totally get her title wrong, but is the head of programming at NBC Universal. She was the head of scripted development at Warner Brothers Television in 2016, and she called us up one day and was like, "What do you guys think about doing an R-rated serialized animated show about Harley with Margot?" Because at the time, like Suicide Squad was coming out, and she was kind of if not the breakout character in that film, and they were interested in pursuing this as an animated thing. And we met with her a couple of times, and we just ended up like our vision for the show was different than her vision for the show. And so, we ended up moving on in a different direction. And I think where we landed, I'm super happy with.
Yeah.
But all that to say, it was a call from the studio just to be like, hey, what do you guys think of that? And I could not say yes fast enough.
Right.
It was like, and the show continues to be like the perfect nexus of everything that I love. Like it checks all the boxes, and I hope the show goes on for 20 years. Who knows?
I do think it's really funny how this is going to make it sound like super dramatic, but in a lot of ways, like all of your experiences have kind of culminated in Harley Quinn down to like who you cast, because it's like you look at Powerless, it's got Ron Funches, it's got Alan Tudyk. There was even Natalie Morales in it and Matt Oberg. Mm-hmm. And then you look at, your Scarecrow, Rahul Kohli from iZombie is on there. And then Surviving Jack, you got Jim Gordon himself, Chris Maloney. I mean, it's kind of amazing. It's like all of your experiences for you and Justin have kind of perfectly culminated with Harley Quinn. But, you shared kind of how it came together. But I am interested specifically in, why? I mean, obviously, like, you're interested in comics and everything, but what was it about this character and opportunity that specifically spoke to you too, like that immediately made you want to say yes?
Well, I've said this before in interviews, but I think like being able to tell, our backstory was in essentially like sitcoms, right? So,
Right.
the way that I always saw this character, or the way that she saw herself, was she thinks she's Mary Tyler Moore, or at least like the beginning of the series. She thinks she's, this sort of fresh faced young woman trying to take on the big city. And I just loved the very basic elevator pitch of it's Mary Tyler Moore if Mary Tyler Moore was a psychopath.
Yeah.
And that, I think, was a language that the studio really spoke, right? I mean, it sort of, I think, made it familiar and safe in a good way as far as pitching it to longtime television executives who looked at this as like a giant swing, right? So when we were trying to get the show, picked up to series, we kept kind of hammering home that idea, which, I love classic sort of workplace comedies, and it felt like that was a prism through which you could look at this show, at least, early days, right? It's
Right.
like, it is an ensemble show. I think it continues to be an ensemble show, but especially like with the first season, it was like, yeah, this is a workplace thing. Like you see you see that sort of broadcast workplace comedy tropiness seep into contexts like the Legion of Doom. And, anytime we could bring about these kind of mundane, workaday kind of aspects to these operatic characters, we went for it. I mean, that's something Justin and I have loved doing, that sort of juxtaposition as much as possible. So, it's Bane in the kitchen at the Legion of Doom making a coffee or cursing a coffee machine and stuff like that. Any of those sort of mundane aspects that we could bring into a supervillain show.
Can I point out one favorite part of that?
Yeah.
I love the henchman agency in the crew episode. Like the fact that there's just this agency that exists. It's like, oh, it's kind of like a temp agency, but for like supervillains who are trying to, this is a random thing. Like, I love, there's that crew introduces Harley to 3 potential crew members for her. And one of them is the professor, who's like seemingly an old man with this like gray mustache, and he's 39 years old. I mean, there's just like all kinds of little things in there. I mean, I'm specifically your target market for this because I have a themed sketchbook that I get worked on at cons that is superheroes doing ordinary things. And so, like Bane making sandwiches. He's fascinating to me. Actually, I think there's an episode where he's having a drink with Two-Face in the Injustice Gang's like little lair thing, and he gives him a drink, and he's trying to figure out how to drink with his mask on, and like little things like that is like right up my alley.
That's awesome. I wanted to credit Jameson Borak, one of our writers, who started out as our script coordinator on the show, came up with all of those like the professor like vital stats. So any of those like little background jokes in that scene are all attributed to him.
They're so
and
cool.
I mean that was like anytime we can also bring in, and Clayface is such a like great sort of vehicle for this, bringing in any sort of weird like inside baseball but Hollywood stuff. We try and do. And so the agents at UTI, Underworld Talent Inc., were totally based on agents that we have met with over the years. Thankfully, not our agent, but yeah, just that sort of fast talking, sort of empty platitudes where they're clearly like not paying attention to what you're saying at all is commonplace in those sorts of meetings. And yeah, that was Alan voicing one of them, and Will Sasso, who we know from all the way back in the Bleep My Dad Says days. He and Nicole Sullivan from that show were voices. She was Mrs. Cobblepot.
Well, I want to ask a specific question about Harley, because I've always found her to be a really interesting character, because I think as much as any other Marvel DC character, she shifts and adjusts like completely. Like, for some, like Batman, the animated series, Arlene Sorkin is the real version. Like, some people will like be angry about it, as he so eloquently covered in the God, what was it? Batman is Backman. Like those two dudes on the couch, which was a very nice touch. I liked it. For others, like, Margot Robbie. Like, Margot Robbie personifies the character. But then there's, like, the early comic version with, like, Terry Dodson art. And then there's the Amanda Conner and Jimmy Palmiotti version. And finally, the one that you and Justin and everyone else put together. And I think that's interesting. It's like, Superman is always Superman. He's like a paragon. Wonder Woman's always Wonder Woman. Wolverine's always going to, drink beer and use his claws to do violence and be the best there is at what he does. But Harley kind of shifts sometimes. I think that's a core question for the show, but is that a feature or a bug to you as a storyteller?
Oh, I think it's absolutely a feature. I mean, I definitely think this show is one that is about her finding identity, especially, I mean, the first two seasons certainly were, the first season was, who am I sort of vocationally, or who am I without this significant other that I've been with, that I'm essentially, the specter of whom is looming over me no matter where I go. And, the second one is, okay, I achieved sort of stardom. I achieved everything that I wanted with, my vocation. Well, what do I really want then? Which of course led to Ivy and the whole Harley Ivy thing. And then this upcoming season, which is very fresh. And we literally, like, the writer's room has been going. This is the third week. So it's very early days. We pitched out sort of the overarching storyline to HBO Max and got the go ahead. But, it's one that's going to delve into her identity as far as, like, her moral compass, right? Which is a huge, like, as you talked about, like, all of these iterations of her over time. Like, when we were pitching this show was when you had the New 52 sort of transitioning into Rebirth, but the Coney Island and Harley as kind of this, like, social justice warrior, and it was a different take on the character, where she was clearly like if not even an anti-hero, just a straight up hero. And that was something that we were, of course, aware of, but we were like, well, that's a place that maybe we can get to years from now. But, we want to start her as a criminal because, A, the Joker is such a huge part, and breaking free of him is such a huge part of the story we want to tell. But also, it's just, man, I really want to explore her as a criminal before we, go
make her break good
elsewhere. Yeah. And so, so this season starts to dabble a little bit in that. At least so far. I say that it being, week 3 and everything's subject to change. But, now that she and Ivy are a couple, how do they keep that going while also remaining true to their wants, in life
right.
and for themselves? So it's always been a show about identity. And so, yeah, that malleability, I think, is absolutely a feature. And I think we've also whether subconsciously or consciously, we've definitely consciously tried to kind of, make an amalgamation of, the various iterations of Harley over the years, starting the show out with her kind of in an attempt to honor that, Arlene Sorkin BTAS version of the character in the very first scene. But we wanted to then very quickly and symbolically have her, shed that, saying, to make a statement that, like, moving forward, this is not that Harley, right? This is a new Harley,
right?
So she's literally shedding her, it's a metamorphosis. She's shedding the Jester costume, the Harley Quinn costume. She's moving into more of, like, I mean, the Amanda Conner stuff was a huge inspiration visually. And she did a lot of early concept art. Yeah. So Shane Glines, who is our lead character designer, who is amazing, did basically draw overs from Amanda's stuff, heavily influenced by Amanda's art. But, her stuff is deceptively complex and doesn't lend itself to animation. Right.
Right.
So Shane then, did his style, but then also did it in a way that we can animate on a weekly basis. But that's getting into like the weeds of the technical stuff. I absolutely think that Harley being kind of, and this I don't want this to sound bad at all. I don't mean it in a bad way. Her being kind of a cipher to some degree was absolutely, it's just there's a wide berth,
Yeah.
right? And that was absolutely an advantage and continues to be, moving forward.
I think that's one of the most. There's a couple things I really love about the show. One is just like, who is she beyond? Because I think it's that you using cipher is a perfect word. Most people look at her as through the prism of the Joker. She's Mr. J, she's Puddin', she's all those things, and you guys specifically like do away with those things to a certain degree. And the other thing I really love, and I have to reference one of my favorite random things from an animated movie ever, which is in Wreck-It Ralph, where Zangief says, "You're a bad guy, but this does not mean you're a bad guy." I don't know if you've ever seen that movie, but it's like, it's a very important distinction that very specifically fits what you all are doing here, because I love like the delineation you have in the show between like Harley and her crew, besides Dr. Psycho, because he's actually a bad guy. And then like Queen of Fables, where there's genuine villains. Like even Harley, or even Ivy, you all are specific in saying that she's not really a criminal in the sense of like she's doing heists or deliberately murdering people. She's like an eco-terrorist who's like looking out for the environment. She cares more about the environment than she does most people besides Harley. And I think that that's really interesting, because there is always kind of a delineation there. It kind of taps into motivations. I mean, it's like Harley really doesn't want a nuke. She wants a highway named after her, and she gets it. So, I mean, why is that such interesting territory to you guys? Because I think that that's one of the most fascinating things you all get into.
Yeah, well, I mean, especially in this season, juxtaposing them not just as, occasional literal partners in crime,
right?
But now they are in a romance, and how does that affect their relationship, which is an ongoing conversation with us. We don't necessarily have all of the answers, but I mean, just back to your point about Ivy and being an eco-terrorist and being, having sort of the planet's best interests in mind. I mean, I think it always just goes back to that old adage of, the best villains are the hero of their own story.
Right.
So I absolutely think, and I don't necessarily even disagree that, Ivy is weirdly, doing the right thing. She's kind of utilitarian in that sense. If you look at it as her trying to, preserve the environment so that everyone benefits. And I think that sort of, very buried humanity in her is something that Harley sees and pulls out of her. And conversely, as in the comics, Harley is kind of the only human, okay, Kite Man and Harley maybe. let's just say Harley is the only human that Ivy thinks is worth a damn, but she also, uses Harley or is able to see sort of the benefits of humanity when she looks at Harley. And so in a weird way, to jump across the aisle to Marvel, sometimes I look at it as like, Betty Ross, Bruce Banner kind of thing, where Harley is able to sort of soothe the savage beast inside of Ivy.
Yeah.
And these are things that we're going to explore moving forward. But yeah, they are such a, like, on a very shallow level, they're just a great odd couple, right?
Right.
It is the sort of classic introvert extrovert thing. Ivy just wants to be left alone. Harley wants to party all the time. And and yet they make it work, and they eventually sort of see the benefits that each other brings to the relationship. So it's very hard to talk about this without getting into like spoilers.
Yeah.
For season 3, but yeah, it's been the way that we pitched their relationship was early on, because when we pitched the show. We initially we weren't 100% sure when we were going to make them like an item.
Hmm.
So, and we only really pitched the first season arc, and we knew that the first season arc was going to concentrate on Harley emancipating herself from the Joker. And like, we didn't want to get into romantic stories yet with her, but we always pitched them as Ferris Bueller, Cameron Fry. And that was, again, like
That's perfect.
we always find it best to use like 35-year-old references when pitching, or older when pitching shows.
I love it. No, I mean, honestly, Cameron Fry is a perfect one there. And also, Lake Bell does a hell of a Cameron Fry. But I do think I am like the way that you all approached it is really interesting, because I feel like you wrote the first 26 episodes in a vacuum, like the writer's room and everything. And I think that is really interesting, because it makes the first two seasons so cohesive together. Like the each 13 episode block, the first, like as you said, the first 13 is all about the emancipation, and then the next 13 is kind of like figuring out Harley and Ivy and everything. And I think that is really, I don't know. I imagine those being able to do those two at the same time made it easier to make it something that's more cohesive than it might have been otherwise. Because if you had those separated and maybe you heard feedback for the first 13 episodes, maybe it turns into like, everyone's like, oh, we love the Joker in this, Alan Tudyk's so good, let's do more of the Joker, instead of what you did, which is, I mean, honestly, like one of the most radical things of the show is basically, I mean, like spoilers for the first season, but you basically got rid of all of the A-listers. I mean, the A-listers in the sense of like all of the Justice League, Batman's destroyed, and then like Joker is something, and I'm not going to say what, but then it just becomes them dealing with what remains in the like literal no man's land, like in the arc from the 90s. And I don't know. I mean, do you think that allowed you all to build something you might not have been able to build otherwise?
Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, certainly what we ended up doing with the Joker, which we're, just, spoiler warning, but let's talk about it because it's aired. The Joker goes through the sort of, he becomes sane. He then has to, Harley has to reverse the process for plot reasons. And where Joker lands by the end of season 2 is this sort of in between. Like he still is, the clown prince of crime. He still is he's an a-hole, but he is now domesticated. And so that is something that we're going to explore moving forward with him in the relationship with Bethany and her children that he's essentially adopted, while still, being a criminal and having these, criminal instincts. That's something that, like, I never dreamed of being able to explore in this show. It just, I love it. Good. Oh, good. Yeah, no, I think one of the pitches on the table, and this isn't really spoiling anything, is just we want in season 3, because he is in this suburban home with these children. We want to see him dancing down the stairs of his suburban home, sort of gingerly avoiding toys that have been left on the stairs in an homage to Joaquin Phoenix.
Oh my God.
But it's like, he's Dick Van Dyke. He's the lovable patriarch of this family.
The thing that works about all this stuff, though, is it all fits the characters, but it's just like slightly shifting what we know about them. Like, you mentioned Bane making a sandwich. Like one of my favorite random things in the entire series is Bane gets a pit to exist in, and he turns it into effectively a self-help clinic. And like that type of stuff, I'm like, I could see that with Bane. Like you read Gail Simone's Secret Six run, and you're like, yeah, okay, I could see that. And
Bane has a lot of good ideas.
Bane does. Honestly, if Two-Face listened to him earlier, they would have been a lot more successful.
That whole run in Batman's Batman with the twins poster and all that between Bane and Two-Face was James Adomian riffing.
Oh my God. He's incredible. I mean, honestly, the Tom Hardy fusion with this like completely new thing was brilliant.
Well, that worked out really well. You talk about like, working in a vacuum and then now not working in a vacuum and listening to the demands of the viewers, and more Bane is like the biggest sort of consensus, response from everyone.
Well, you managed to already make I don't know, I'm sure you do know this, but the Poison Ivy fandom is intense. And you delivering the Harley is, I mean, I'm sure you've made them a very happy fandom. So now they got to move on to Bainton.
Yeah, what's gonna happen? What's gonna become of Bane? What's gonna become of Cheryl? Will she ever go back to being a Bane boy? Who knows? She's such a sellsword. But Cheryl will be back, also voiced by Lake Bell. She's currently working under Gordon, who, without spoiling it too much, we're telling a story right now where he's continuing his mayoral aspirations.
Oh my God! I also random political thing. I love the episode where it was just Harvey. It was like the flashback episode with Harvey Dent, and like literally every time he came up, all he cared about was like approval numbers. Basically, it was very very accurately political. But well, we just have a little bit more time. But I did want to ask about. Like, I'm amazed by how many nods to broader comic continuity there are. Like, you have, obviously, like, as Darkseid is and Kite Man's Hell Yeah. So it's like very, very, Tom King's probably thrilled about this, to like the Nora Freeze storyline, one of like the golden calves of comic related story history. And like Barbara Gordon's Batgirl costume. Like, all those things are, not necessarily overt, but things where you will enjoy them if you understand them. And also they just fit. But is there a balance there? Like trying to connect with what came before without making it just kind of like an Easter egg fest?
Yeah. I mean, I think things, I guess the general rule that I sort of put in my head and try and kind of influence everyone to go by is just that it's the simple thing of, there have been 1,000 stories told before that are good and worthy and like great inspiration as like sort of a leaping off point for us. Yeah. That we don't want to. It is. Yeah. It's what you said. It's going for a balance of like honoring what's happened in the past, using stories and events and arcs that have existed in the past, that that are built very sturdily, that we know work, but that we can just take a hint of and then run with it in our own direction, and to make comedic and to not just regurgitate a story that's been told in comic form or in other televised media or whatever, because what's the point of that? Like everybody knows these stories who's watching, theoretically. Yeah. Right. So yeah, anytime we can take like the No Man's Land thing, right? Like it's just, I mean, we have a balance on the staff of that I think would skew more heavily towards like comic neophytes, really, because at the end of the day, there's only a few of us that either have an encyclopedic knowledge of it, or none of us have an encyclopedic knowledge of it. Like I don't want to say that we do, but
you know a lot.
We know a lot, or we are willing to put in some heavy deep dive research into stuff, and then the rest of the staff is comedy nerds, and and to us, like that's the thing that that's really important to us. Maybe even more so than the comics knowledge, as far as like weighting things, right? Because we want to tell fresh stories, and it is good to get like fresh eyes from people that were like we literally have people on the staff who just recently told us, they're like, honest to God, we thought you guys invented Kite Man.
Well, this version you kind of did.
Yeah, well, sure.
He's like a lovable idiot. He's the Kite Man we never knew we always wanted.
Yeah, well, that's good. I don't know what Tom King's reaction to the show is. I got to meet him once after I guess it was the year that he and Mitch Gerrard's, if I'm not butchering his last name, won the Eisner for Mr. Miracle, and the show had not come out yet, but we premiered the pilot, and I saw him at one of the bars at Comic-Con. And went up, shook his hand, and was like, I'm working on the show. And he's like, oh, I know a Kite Man's in it. I heard that. Or like he saw a preview or whatever. So he seemed excited about it. And now I just think like I lose sleep over like, oh, does he think that we're just like shitting on his Kite Man? Because I love War of Jokes and Riddles was absolutely I mean, obviously with the hell yeah and all of that, and just the general look of the character, and was a huge influence. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the way that you guys use references is you really walk that balance really nicely, because some of it's just passive. I told you before we started recording I was going to bring up something that was a relative deep cut. I love that Noonan's bar is in there. I'm a massive Hitman fan, and
Nice.
I mean, I love the fact that Noonan's bar is there, because that means, and I'm not saying you're ever going to bring Tommy Monahan and like Nat the Hat and Baitor into the show or something like that, but the thing is the fact that that is where Harley and her crew goes if they go to a bar is just the narrative possibilities by making that the place is like, I don't know. I mean, anybody who read Hitman and loves Hitman sees that in the show and is me like, anything is on the table now. And that's really nice. That's like world building without forcing it.
Yeah, well, no, the reason that Noonan's bar is in there is because Dean Laurie, who co-created the show with us, was actually at the time writing a live-action Hitman pilot for Sci-Fi. Now, I don't think that's moving forward, but he was heavily in that world.
Oh yeah.
While we were writing the first season. Mm-hmm. So so it made all the sense in the world to have Noonan's in there.
Oh my god, yeah. I somehow didn't even notice it until like the first episode of the second season, and then I was like, "Holy shit, that says Noonan's!" I'm like, we are like so close to Baitor screaming at people. He's the perfect person to follow up Southern Gentleman Clayface and the Joker, but not the Joker as a bartender. Just a couple more questions. This isn't even a question. I just want to say, you have amazing casting throughout. Kaylee Cuoco. I mean, like the fact that like you have Arlene Sorkin and Margot Robbie before her, and like she manages to make the character her own. Amazing. Lake Bell already mentioned. I mean, the million characters, Alan Tudyk does incredible. My most inspired casting, and the thing that actually shocked me the most, Jacob Tremblay as Damian Wayne. As soon as that voice came out, I was like, this is the funniest damn thing I've ever heard in my entire life. It was so perfect. And that kid killed it. Absolutely killed it. And I don't know. I mean, I guess with the casting stuff, obviously a lot of it, Ron Funches, Alan Tudyk, all these people, et cetera, et cetera. But for things like that, for Jacob, for like Sana Lathan as Catwoman, et cetera, how do you marry roles with actors? Because like that's one I never would have saw in a million years.
Well, a lot of people just read. It's read for the part, that is.
Right.
And so we actually do oftentimes go through. There are definitely exceptions, but where we just offer the role to someone that we just know is going to knock it out of the park. But in the case of Catwoman, we heard a lot of auditions, and when Sanaa taped, it was just kind of it felt right to us.
Yeah.
And so a lot of it is just listening to 20 people's auditions, and I mean Alan read for we knew he could do it, but at the time it was like we had to kind of hear a bunch of options, because the Joker is obviously such an icon,
right?
That they're not just going to like award the role to somebody unless you were like, no, we have to like bring back Mark Hamill, and then
right?
Like, oh, okay, sure. And Alan ended up with just like a 10-minute heads up or whatever. He's so good and so smart, and so his instincts are so spot on that we're like, oh well, we know you're Clayface. You're already Clayface, but what do you think about doing the Joker, just trying it? And he's like, oh, okay, I'll come up with something. And then just did it, and I think his performance is, influenced a bit by the Hamill, influenced a bit by the Heath Ledger. And then he just does petulant man-child better than like anyone that I know. Mm-hmm. So, and that was like the version of the Joker that we're going for. So, I mean, that just felt right. But like, yeah, and then there's some roles that like where like with Ron, it's like we knew that we wanted Ron in the show, and we knew we wanted Ron as some sort of physically imposing character that was sort of the, antithesis of his voice. Like Ron just oozes like love and peace and, maybe being slightly high. But yeah, so we kind of came up with the King Shark thing kind of after Ron.
Mm-hmm.
And,
so you knew you had Ron, but you wanted to find out, you had to find somebody for Ron?
Yeah. And then we like King Shark being this sort of, as Ron's voice is kind of a walking contradiction to the physical imposition of King Shark. We also wanted King Shark's interests to be something much less classic, like alpha predator. And so that's, how we ended up with the basic characterization of King Shark. But there's no sort of, one way that we approach casting. It comes from sort of both sides. We either start with the actor or start with the basic character and then listen to a bunch of auditions. Even Lake Red for Ivy. We heard a bunch of auditions for Ivy. But it was kind of obvious when we heard
her tone and her, I don't know, just everything about her performance is so perfect. But all right, I know you have to go, so I'm going to finish with a patron question. It's from Sean Kirkham. In the good old days when going to a movie theater was a common pastime, who would you say is your favorite Sean from Skybound to see movies with? Follow up, why is it me?
I guess it depends on how Sean is spelled now.
He spelled it specifically S-H, and I was like, I emailed him back, and I told him, I was like, I feel like this is a leading question. I'm a journalist, Sean. Come on.
It's a little leading. Well, I'll say this. I think I've seen slightly more films at the theater, at the old AMC Century City, with Sean Kirkham than I have Sean Makowitz. But I have had lunch with Sean Makowitz without Sean Kirkham.
My, this is going to be a controversy in the Skybound offices.
Maybe I have lunch Sean and a movie Sean?
I don't know what this says about them. Like, Sean, well, now I can't just say Sean. Sean Kirkham, he loves hanging out with you, but apparently only while watching movies. I'm sorry. It's a truth. It's a truth. Good pair of Seans, though. Good pair of Seans.
Well, I have to attribute my friendships with the two Seans to my longtime friendship with Brian Huntington from Skybound. So
there you go. So Brian beats the Seans. In your face, Seans.
Who needs two Seans when you can have one very strong Brian?
I've been saying that for my entire life, so I'm right there with you. But all right, Patrick, I know you got to go, so thank you so much for coming on to talk about comics, Harley Quinn, the Battle of the Seans, and everything else. I appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks, David.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with Harley Quinn's co-showrunner Patrick Schumacher. You can find Schumacher on Twitter at PM Schumacher and his work in Harley Quinn on HBO Max. Love Off Panel and want to support it? Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts today and give the show a rating and review while you're at it, but 5 stars only. You can support the show by backing it on Patreon. Find the show on Patreon at patreon.com/offpanel, and when you back it on there, you get early access to each week's podcast as well as weekly content and more. Want even more? Subscribe to my subscription comic site Sketched at sketch.com for long-form articles, interviews, and the rest of the site's content and its members-only forum. You can find Off Panel and Sketched on social media by liking it on Facebook at /Sketched, that's SKTCHD, follow on Twitter and Instagram at @SketchComic, or following me at @SlicedFriedGold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Brandon DePillis, Patrick Broward, Declan Shalvey, Dan Guarino, Josh Williamson, Adam Freeman, Ben Wild, Brian Klein Q, SB, Antonia Offen, Nick Bennett, Daniel Whitfield, Scotty Young, Susanna Polo, Jeff Weira, Reed Hinkley Barnes, Mario Tianbang, AbductedTheComic.com, Andrew Carita, Matt Mahoney, Charlie Chu, Stephen Hall, Pensacola Pop Comics, Kim Eslin, Philip Myra, Christian Shelton, Kenny Porter, Chris Pacello, Torrin Grudenbeck, Buzz Bubbles, Christopher Todd, Transmitter Down, Watts Comics and Books, Carl Mizell, Danny Ollie, Paul Salate, Sakil Wilson, Alex Demetriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Liana Kingus, Keegan Ray, Wesley Gift, Sean Kirkham, Harry Small, Alistair Ross, Julio Anta, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Rywant, Vita Ayala, Tara Ferguson, Dave Slusher, W&Q Comics, Akil Kokachi, Phil White, Sean Pennell, Ken Heidelman, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, Ryan Alcock, Nick Michelin, David Kelly, Rob Wilson IV, Nick Polito, Owen McCready, Brendan Fletcher, Gary Maloney, Jonathan Nilsson, Matthew Groom, Jason Assey, Adam Bogart, Xavier Files, Matthew Taylor, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, Dave Brawley, Nick Hall, Bjorn Basin, John Hendricks, Steve Anderson, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Cheng, Benjamin Shipper, Colin McMahon, Chris Palmer, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Kat McKenzie, Adam Highfield, Fiona Staples, Chris O'Halloran, Mark Abnett, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim Demonakos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. Quick thanks to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote and performed Odd Panel's theme song just for the show. Check out their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.